Talks con Amanda Fernandez. My name is Elviso Collara, Vice President of Marketing Communications at Latinos for Education. Thank you for joining us today for what promises to be a compelling and insightful conversation. For those who may not be familiar with us, Latinos for Education is the first Latino-founded and led national organization dedicated to developing, placing, and connecting essential Latino leadership in the education sector, while mobilizing Latino voices to promote practices and policies that remove barriers to equitable educational opportunity. LatinoED Talks is our series of live stream conversations with leading Latino figures that dive into the heart of education issues impacting our community. We are thrilled to have with us, as always, our host, Amanda Fernandez, the founder and CEO of Latinos for Education. Amanda has dedicated her career to advancing Latino leadership in the education sector and has been instrumental in advocating for equitable educational opportunities. Under her leadership, Latinos for Education has expanded from a Boston-based nonprofit into a national force, promoting policies and practices that address educational disparities. She previously served on the Massachusetts Governor's Latino Empowerment Council and as a trustee of the board with the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. She's a 2020 recipient of the McNulty Prize Catalyst Fund and a senior fellow at Future Ed. Joining Amanda in this important dialogue is Maria Teresa Kumar, president and co-founder of Voto Latino. Maria Teresa is a powerhouse in the field of civic engagement and advocacy, and her leadership at Voto Latino has been pivotal in mobilizing Latino voters and amplifying their voices on critical issues. In today's conversation, Amanda and Maria Teresa will delve into the upcoming 2024 election and its implications for the Latino community. They'll discuss what Latinos are prioritizing this year, the stakes involved, and how we can ensure that Latino voices are heard and valued in the electoral process. Now, we encourage you all to engage with us during this session, so please feel free to leave your questions and comments in the chat throughout the conversation. We'll have a dedicated Q&A segment where Amanda and Maria Teresa will address your thoughts and inquiries. Your participation is invaluable, and we're excited to hear your perspectives. Thank you again for tuning in, and we look forward to engaging with you in what promises to be an enlightening and impactful dialogue. Without further ado, les presento Amanda Fernandez. Amanda, bienvenida.
¿Qué tal, Elvis? Gracias. And hello, everyone. Buenas tardes. Buenos días a todos. I'm super excited about our conversation today. It's so timely and important. And of course, the Latino vote and its impact on education it could be really instrumental and monumental for our students in the coming years. But with that, I'm just really excited to have Maria Teresa Kumar with us today. As Elvis mentioned, we'll be talking a little bit about Latina leadership, which I'm excited about. The 2024 election, of course, the most important topic right now that everyone's discussing, Latino voters. And then we will be introducing at a high level survey data and a report that Latinos for Education will be releasing today after this webinar. But let me introduce Maria Teresa to you all a little bit more. So Maria Teresa Kumar is the co-founder and president of Voto Latino, the largest voter registration and Latino youth advocacy organization in the country. In its 20-year history, Voto Latino has registered 1.5 million voters and is on pace to register hundreds of thousands of voters this year. Maria Teresa advised President Barack Obama's task force on 21st century policing and currently serves on the National Task Force on Election Crises, the Brookings Institution's Working Group on Universal Voting, and is the chair of the Latino Anti-Disinformation Lab. She has received accolades for her influential work and is an Emmy-nominated analyst for MSNBC. Maria Teresa serves on the boards of Steve Madden, Emily's List, and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and is also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Bueno, quite a list of accomplishments. Bienvenida, Maria Teresa, and thank you for being what we can see.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I've been looking forward to it. And the work that you are all doing, Amanda, is instrumental, not just for the Latino community, but frankly for the country. We need our community to have access to the best of education so that we can so we can thrive communally. And I think that what you are doing and explaining to folks oftentimes the barriers that we have and being on the pulse of what parents are thinking and educators are thinking is incredibly important.
Thank you. And I look forward to sharing what they have to say about this election and what's important. So with that, let's start a little bit on the personal side. I am excited about this because it's not often I get to have a conversation with a Latina founder of an organization. And the reason why is because of things we know, but let me just touch on some of those. Only 2% of all philanthropic dollars go to support Latino-led organizations. That number is even lower for Latina-led organizations. And as a founder, and I guess I'll speak for myself, the pressure of gender and ethnicity can add more pressure to succeed. And it feels like you might have sort of more of a weight on your shoulders to succeed because we represent so much of what the Latino community aspires to and needs. So just with that, you've built this national institution over the course of 20 years. I'd love for you to reflect a little bit on your journey, Maria Teresa, some early challenges you may have encountered, but importantly, how you've been able to not only build, but sustain Voto Latino for these last couple of decades.
So thank you so much for table setting that. I think that one of the biggest challenges we have among founders of organizations is to really talk about the skinny, the hard stuff, right? I'll share with you, Voto Latino for the first 3 years was funded on my credit card. Don't do that. It's a terrible idea. But I didn't have access to capital. I just had an idea, right? And this idea was very simple. I had met Rosario Dawson, and she had another gentleman that was a marketing expert in the Latino youth community. And they had worked with MTV to put together a series of PSAs encouraging young Latinos to participate in electoral politics. And putting myself in that position, I was 28 years old at the time. I had worked in government in Congress. I had interned in Sacramento when I was in college. I had gone to the Kennedy School of Government, and so I was as political as they came at 28. And it wasn't until I saw a PSA by Voto Latino that I ever heard what I felt inside, and that was that I was a fierce, proud Latina, and I was a fierce, proud American, and that both of them made up my identity, but that I also belonged in the political conversation. And that was after I was already steeped in politics. And so when I met Rosario, she said, look, you could have the PSAs, you could have the name, but there's no funding. Rosario is not independently wealthy. I definitely was not independently wealthy. She's like, do with what you can. And of course, every immigrant mother's dream is to have their 30-year, on the eve of my 30th birthday, to have their 30-year-old come in and knock on the door saying, I'm moving back home. But that's what happened. But it was a mixture of this naivete of how hard can it be, but also having, I will tell you, I had a very clear vision of what I wanted Voto Latino to accomplish from the very beginning. And that was, I knew that as a young person navigating America for my family, that I was making decisions for my household long before I turned 18. I was being asked to navigate really hard spaces for my family simply because I knew English at 9 years old. And just like I was having that experience, my cousins were having that experience, and millions of first gen Latinos were having that experience. And so at the same time, we saw the proliferation of MySpace. And I said, well, what if we created a political conversation around young Latinos voting and teaching their families how to vote in a place where we knew we were not expected to participate? And this was at the same time that the census came out and declared Latinos the second largest demographics of American, right? And what folks didn't realize is that all of us, the majority of us, were under the age of 18. And I grew up in ruby blue, progressive Sonoma. And when Pete Wilson in California decided that Proposition 187, the original Show Me Your Paper laws, was okay for my neighbors to vote for, the chilling effect on being brown and Latino, despite being American, was very real. And so when the census said that Latinos were the second largest demographic, Amanda, we looked at the map and I said, okay, well, where are Latinos have small influence today, but have huge numbers in the classroom? And so in a place like Georgia, Latinos in 2010 were 2% of the electoral base, but they were 16% of the classroom. That was also the case in Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Texas, North Carolina. If anybody watching sees a pattern, we chose the battleground states before anybody declared them battleground states, and we got to work. And as a founder, trying to change the minds of the establishment of who they perceived Latinos to be was really hard, because they perceived us not to be American, not to know English, not to be curious about technology, not to be curious about education. All of those 4 issues was not my experience. My parents may have worked in the field, taking care of the elderly, taking care of, of young people, mowing lawns, all of it. That could have been my family, but my family, my elders were doing that, investing in myself and my cousins with the long-term vision of you're going to school, you're going to achieve, you're going to, right? And so really fighting those barriers of the spaces that we're supposed to belong to versus the spaces that our families have instilled that we belong to is very different. And so, with Voto Latino, it was a great sacrifice, but in this journey of founder, I think one of the things that as Latinas, sometimes we have the most difficulty is, and it's very cultural, is because we come from such as resilient, self-sufficient families. Culturally, our biggest challenge is asking for help. Our biggest challenge is admitting what we don't know, or more importantly, asking someone for assistance. And I had to have that epiphany, Amanda, that in order for Voto Latino to really become self-realized, I could have had the best marketing plan, but until I learned to ask for what I didn't have but needed, whether it was asking the hard questions of funding, asking people, recognizing that when I asked for an investment in Voto Latino, it had nothing to do with me, but for the realization of ability of mobilizing humans. It was powerful, but it was hard, because in my family, we tried not to carry debt. We tried to pay our bills on time. We like all of it, right? And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh. Anyway, so that was my biggest journey. It's like coming to terms with our cultural limitations, right? Because lo que pasa en la familia queda en la familia. And I felt like I was failing even before I started. And so I'll tell you, the first people to invest in me when I finally got over that hump were 4 white women from Silicon Valley. It was transformational, because I didn't realize that I was going to have allies the moment that I started sharing my vision out loud. And to this day, we started the first major check that I received was $25,000. And boy, did we put it to work. 20 years later, this is our 20-year anniversary. I'm proud to say that I have raised over $115 million for the organization.
Wow.
And we've had material results because we have flipped Colorado. Arizona is now purple. Nevada is purple. North Carolina is purple. We've safeguarded Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and Texas is almost there. But it's because we first registered 2,000 voters the first time we went out of the gate. In the last election in 2020, we registered 650,000, 82% who went on and voted. And right now, we have accomplished of registering 1.5 million voters, and we're going to register 500,000 by the time we finish. And what made us break away was because we didn't come from the industry, Amanda. We said, okay, well, how does corporate America do a great job of fleecing us of our money, of hard-earned cash? Let's start applying those technologies. And so the reason we've been able to scale is that we apply a machine learning, digital targeting, marketing to our community, because we need to meet them in communication where they are, in spaces they feel comfortable, and say, look, you are the smartest person about what you need in your family. You are the smartest person on what issues are impacting your family. And you are the smartest person to be able to contribute to electing leaders that will meet your values. And by changing that paradigm shift, not only have we seen young Latinos in record number register to vote, but increasingly we're encouraging them to run for office, and we're seeing them get elected. And that to me is a paradigm shift.
That's huge.
It's
That's
fun.
huge. Yeah.
But without tears, but not without tears. Like, it has been a hard journey, as you can imagine, right? Trying to change the establishment's minds of what a Latino is in this country. And I like to say we are Latino, but fiercely American.
I love that. Thank you for that. So I heard having a clear vision. I heard that it was personal to you. I heard that there was a gap that needed to be filled, and through this vision, you were going to fill it. And boy, have you. Changing the minds about Latinos, which I think we all bear some responsibility for that in our own context. And boy, some of the difficulties sure resonated with me. The cultural norms of resilience and self-sufficiency. Same for me, just asking for the help and the money was a barrier I had to overcome too. But I I as well, I didn't I started with $5,000. Actually, I first started with 0,
I
and
started
then
with negative.
right, 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 but I didn't put it on credit either,
Yeah,
so,
super smart.
right, right. So I didn't do any of that, but yeah, I started out with very little and, you build over time. And just a quote that I use a lot is and I thought it to myself a lot during the early days is this quote from The Alchemist, from Paulo Coelho, who says, "When you want something, the universe conspires to help you achieve it." And it sounds like you did that. You brought folks in, you talked to everybody, and brought them in to conspire to help you build this organization. So, congrats to you on
Well, we're not done, but I do have to say that it was
that.
my mother said the same thing to me. My mother was so funny when I started, and my grandmother said the same thing. She's like, when we came to this country, I heard a lot of no's, but Maria Teresa, you just need a yes.
Mhm,
And I think it's building that resilience that a veces nos da pena, right? You feel
mhm.
embarrassed if someone says no or they don't see your vision. And then you just realize that you have to create a different metal because at the end of the day, what we were trying to build was not for an individual, it was for the community. And I have to say that we've been nerdy from the beginning. We've been data driven. We've been able to go into rooms and really demonstrate through data where Latinos are. And I think our biggest challenge is changing mindsets on how we are perceived. I often say that Latinos, we are the invisible in this country that make the visible possible. And this is the year that we have to own every single headline because there is no White House, Senate, or Congress in any state in the union without us.
Mhm.
And we need to own our power.
Well, with that, it's a great transition to talking about the election specifically. So let's do that. So some argue that this election will be the most consequential election of our time.
Hmm.
So Maria Teresa, what's at stake for the Latino community in this year's presidential election?
Before I would be able to frame it as our economic growth, our existential threat is our humanity. We have never seen a party of extremists overtake a party where chanting and encouraging mass deportation without getting checked from any media outlet while it was happening speaks to a disconnect of who we are as Americans in this country. And I don't say that lightly. I will share with you, Voto Latino, when we started, we were fully nonpartisan. In 2020, Voto Latino created a C4 so that we could explain what was at stake for the Latino community specifically. My family, my sister-in-law and her family, they live in El Paso. And my husband and I, we were in the same Walmart in the same mall 2 days before the El Paso massacre. We just happened to leave the day before, but I was there with my children, and it was timing. And to understand the chilling effect, to have someone in the Oval Office inspire a man to jump in his car and drive 10 miles to cause maximum harm in a community that is considered one of the safest cities in the country speaks to what is at stake, because he was basically channeling the hatred of the sitting president and quoting him in the creed that they found in his car, that Latinos and Mexicans were invaders. My organization during that administration spent a lot of time with families at the border. Immigration was not our issue, but to see children being pulled apart and witnessing them and seeing what was happening, knowing that they're in the dragnets that were happening after schools in even in California, and witnessing families who were American citizens getting caught and put in jail until they were able to demonstrate otherwise, tells us that we are at an essential moment in our country, that our participation is mandatory for the protection of our community, but also for the protection of this country. And I don't go to dark places often, but it's because of what I've witnessed and what we've seen, and because of the rhetoric that is coming out, that there is a real, anguish about the branding of America. But what we bring to it is resilience, beauty, growth, and protection, and care and nurture. And what I hope to see, and what I'm seeing blossoming coming out of the other side, is a whole new slew of young people who are hearing the call of joy and possibility and turning the page and wanting to get active. Since there was a change at the top of the ticket on the Democratic side, we went from registering 36,000 voters for the first 6 months to now having registered over 110,000. And Amanda, what's exciting to me is that what they are seeing is how politics should be: one of respect, debating issues, done with dignity, and speaking to a voter with dignity. And of the people we've registered, 65% of them are under the age of 25. Every 30 seconds, a Latino youth becomes of age, eligible to vote. They are our core audience, because we know that when they participate, they change the world, because they influence not just themselves, but their friends and their families. And so going into this election, it's not just economic issues. It's like, how do you want an ancestor for your children today? How do you want to make sure that you're creating protection so that when they go into the classroom, they are not being judged by a teacher or being pulled aside and asking them if they're American? Instead, the teacher is doing her charge of teaching them to the best of their ability.
Wow. I needed to take a moment to take all that in. Can we stay a bit on this youth vote? And you cited this this estimate that every 30 seconds a Latino turns 18, and just maybe speak a little bit more on the evolution of the youth vote. I mean, you've been kind of prescient from the beginning. You've known where to go, and you've known where the demographic trends are coming from. I saw you speak probably 10 years ago.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
15 years ago, I don't remember, but it was a while ago, and you were, because you saw it all coming.
Yeah.
Right? That's part of being a visionary. You saw what was coming, this sort of tsunami of the demographic growth of the Latino community, and now it's here. Can you say a little bit more about how you are engaging the Latino youth now? What are you saying to them? What's the message? What's resonating? What's getting them excited?
First of all, what I find most exciting about young people is that once you give them the roadmap on how to unleash their voice and their power, they go. And that is what we're seeing right now. So in the beginning of this year, we decided that we were going to do college campus leadership training. And we started with about 10. I did a call last night with our college chapters, and we're at 169. And these are young people that are in our key battleground states, joining us late nights, on the weekends, during the day, trying to learn more so that they can be ready for registration, so that he could be ready for watch parties, so that they could be informed on how to communicate with their peers, but also with their broader audience of their families and friends. And one of the things that Voto Latino, I think what has made us unique, is that we've always designed our programs to meet that young person where they are. Oftentimes organizations, and even, I think, even, in the spaces of education and in workplace environments, we design something and expect someone to show up and expect them to understand the transaction that's happening. And what we've done instead is saying, wait, where are you? Let's knock on your door. let's go into your spaces and let's speak your language. And by that, I don't mean Spanish, right? We do Spanglish, we do a nod, we do a wink, but it's all of like, where are you experiencing your world? And how can we make sure that you realize that being a civic person, being a citizen is also part of a shade of who you are. And so from the beginning, we were on MySpace. From MySpace, we went to Facebook, and then we went to Twitter, and then we went to Instagram, and we're now on TikTok. But then we also go to local clubs, and we'll do, in the beginning, we would go, when kids were going to clubs, we would partner with radio DJs, and we would go in Colorado, and it was so cool. We would literally register between 60 to 120 voters in less than an hour. Why? I mean, no one had asked them. No one had asked Latino youth to participate. And we know that our programs are effective because oftentimes people say Latinos don't vote. That's not true. The biggest challenge in the Latino community is literally closing our voter registration gaps. Because of our 36 million eligible Latino voters, 9 million are first-time voters. So they don't have a history of voting, so no campaign ever calls them. And 10 million are unregistered. And we're talking about close to 60% of them are under the age of 33. Wow. And so we develop all of our programs, like we're asking you, we're making sure that you're super smart on the issues that you care about. We're going to make sure that we go from your cool older sister getting you to register to your loving, nagging aunt that finally you vote because ya no quieres escuchar de nosotros, right? Like that's how we do it. But then we keep you in community. We ask you, do you want to register other voters? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to phone? Like, do you want to run for office? Do you want to work on a campaign? So we show them like all these other possibilities, but we start them first with, what do you care about? Because if you think politics is not for you, but you told me that you care about the environment, well, the only way to fix the environment is to get the people that you care about into the system. I think that oftentimes when you listen to political pundits, they underestimate and underappreciate that people living in carne propia, the challenges that they may be facing at school or the challenges they may be facing in the workplace, you don't have to explain to them that the rent is too high or fair wages is important. You just have to channel them that if they participate, the system will work if they vote for people who represent their values.
Yeah. And there's a couple things as it relates to education that I'm thinking about as you speak relative to how you're engaging the youth. That there's big movements in education to really bring back the importance of civics education, right?
Yes,
and you're not seeing it enough, right? You're not seeing it enough. And we know that in our low-income communities in particular, the access to courses such as that and other courses that would help just expand knowledge and opportunity for our young people just isn't sufficient. So I'm thinking about the transition of kids who are, the youth you're talking about who have just come out of high school, many of them, and not having sort of that foundation and sort of where you have to start from because of that. And what the education system could do to help you, right? To have kids more enlightened about what they can do to participate.
So, I mean, I think this is what most folks don't realize, but only 8 states of our 50 require a year of civic education to graduate from high school. When you have so many school districts where young people are the first generation, where are they learning about our electoral system? Because they can't go home and talk to their parents about it because their parents expect them to know about it, right? To explain it to them. And so I do think that there are opportunities, and maybe even for Latinos in education, to consider is like, are there lesson plans that we can share with teachers? Just plain lesson plans that if they were given the opportunity to learn, to share that information, it is important. In the past, Voto Latino has partnered with AFT, the teachers union, and created those lesson plans around specifically get out the vote. But the scale that is needed is, we identified 7 states at the time, and within the 7 states, it was 20 school districts, very minimal. We were proud of the work, but it's absolutely scalable, and there is an appetite. What is really neat is that there are now tools that we didn't have. If you can create some fun information on TikTok, that goes viral. Because if we're not doing it, I can tell you that the other side is very effective in sending out messages that suppress our young people's appetite to participate in our elections. I don't know if folks have been following the news lately, but yesterday, the Department of Justice actually arrested folks from Russia Today because they were actively using influencers to discourage Latino youth from participating in our elections.
Wow.
That's stuff that we've been monitoring. We're very aware of it, but we do need to figure out how do we use their means of communication, not just to get them to register, but to also talk specifically around civic education.
Wow. You've got a lot on your plate to be, removing the obstacles of what's getting in the way of our youth in particular to know what the opportunities are to engage. We've seen some similar sort of trajectories within our own fellowships. We work with families, we work with Latino educators and aspiring leaders in education. And again, I found this parallel from what you were talking about of, you give the information, you educate, and our people are ready to step up when they have that herramientas to do it, right? And so we're seeing the same thing in terms of running for office, for example. We've seen this big jump through our fellowships over the years of more of our educators wanting to run for office, running for school board, running for school committees. It's amazing.
It's exciting.
It's super exciting. I mean, I'm very hopeful for Latino representation in our politics.
I keep saying that we have to occupy all the spheres.
We do, yes. Yes, of course, because then,
everybody says resist. I'm like, resist nothing. Occupy.
Well, if at the rate we're growing, if we're not doing it, those seats won't be filled with anyone. So
exactly.
It's time for us to step up.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about. I'm gonna jump into some of our survey data, sort of digging into a little bit more on what our Latino community that we surveyed is prioritizing within education, right? What do they care about?
Yeah.
So again, just to frame it though, I have this, I thought that education had pretty much been top of mind for Latinos in elections for quite a bit of time over the course of many years. But what are you seeing now are the highest priority items for Latino voters to get them to actually turn out and vote?
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because for us, normally education is usually the top 6 issues for sure. Something has changed since the pandemic where our young people have not recovered economically as fast as other generations. And I preface this by saying that in the last surveys that we do, we basically do surveys of 2,000 registered voters, young voters specifically. The number one issue for 18 to 29-year-olds was housing, Amanda.
Mhm.
And when we said housing, our follow-up question is, in what sense? And I will be honest, I was in the camp of housing because you want to move out of your parents' house, right? Housing because you eventually want to buy your home. Amanda, a 22-year-old baggage claim agent in Phoenix, Arizona, when we asked him his follow-up question, housing context, he said, I need to figure out how to budget my money because I don't know if I will be able to afford a meal or 2 meals a day. 22 years old. When you look at the survey and we unpacked it, young people between the ages of 18 and 29, 35% had gone on government assistance in the last year, and 22% of them had acquired a second job. What they are shouldering are the burdens often equivalent of what we see of single mothers in their 30s, not young people of 22, 23, 24 years of age in the Latino community. And so when the candidate Harris came out last week talking specifically around housing and building more affordable housing, and providing pathways for people to buy their first home, she was no longer talking to late 30s, early 40s aspirational voters. She was talking about the 18-year-old who told me that they don't have enough to eat, even though they are working a very good job. And so when people say that young people are apathetic, they're not apathetic. They're disillusioned, rightfully so, because the systems that we have created have not made big bets on them as we have in previous generations. In the last century, it was an American class that said, we are going to provide access to excellent education. We are going to provide a GI Bill for people to go to school and to secure their very first homes. We made a pact with each other that our investment was going to build a strong, healthy middle class. And we're incumbent now to decide, are we going to do the same thing for a multicultural America? And it's going to have to be our will to do so in a place that looks disproportionately different than last century, but that I deeply believe that our multiculturalism is our superpower. And that if we can harness it, then that we as a country laying down the rules, not just for here, but abroad, are unstoppable. Because I also believe that this generation of young people have a true collaborative spirit where they see each other in spaces and celebrate each other in ways that are whole and that allows us to actually be better. But we have to make sure that that our social contract is equivalent and that we demand it to be equivalent of what it was for a very homogenous country of 100 years ago. We need to make the same demands now for one that is less, but that is our superpower.
Wow. I hadn't heard anyone talk about these issues that are affecting so many Americans right now in the way that you just did, and the way we have to think about the social contract differently for this new generation of Americans that are the adults and those who are contributing to the workforce now and soon in the majority. That is what comes to mind for me is, does it look different? Does the social, I mean, we have obviously the basic needs, right? We have the basic, we need housing, we need access to education, etc. Do you have any thoughts on the social contract, how it might look a little bit different with this sort of multicultural world or country actually that we have?
So I think some of it is basics, right? We have to go back to the basics of dignity and work. Somehow we have gone through social stratification that is increasingly looking like what our parents fled of Latin America, then social stratification of this quintessential that dignity comes from good work, and recognizing and respecting that if you are a janitor, you are doing a service and you are working with dignity and making sure that the classrooms are clean so that children can learn, and treating that person with respect and giving dignity to that work. And I think that's back to basics. But alternatively, I think because right now we are so preoccupied talking about our differences and the biases that we're experiencing every day in education and across, we are neglecting to prepare for the revolution that is taking place when it comes to AI. And it is on the educational front, it is on the social justice front. It is the biggest disruptor that we're beginning to experience, but because we are so, litigating legislation and policies that were decided 50 years ago, that is our biggest blind spot. And I do think that we need to have frank conversations on what that disruption means, because there's going to be, our challenge as Americans is that we've always been identified as who we are by work. But if AI promises to liberate us and give us more free time, what does that mean where it's equal, right? And where does it mean for us to be creatives in real senses and being whole? And then the other part, and this is, trickier, and I know this is highly controversial, but I do think that we have to reimagine the impact of accessible drugs are happening to our children. And what I mean by that is oftentimes when people talk about drugs, they see it oftentimes from higher socioeconomic stratums where it's considered recreational and it's a phase that children will go through. But in many brown and poor communities, children get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
And so this freeing of access to drugs in many ways is not addressed universally on a passage of, oh, that's what we did in our youth and now we're in Wall Street. For many of our children in our community, that's all they end up in. And I think we have to have a hard conversation on how do we address its accessibility without treatment and without providing parents with the resources to help navigate these really hard issues that we're timid about, because it's one thing to make sure that incarceration is, and making sure that policies don't incarcerate children and folks that are addicted. That we need to have those conversations, but separately we need to also talk about the disproportionate impact of having access to drugs and gateway drugs impact our community, because some of us, and I speak from the heart because I know how it's ravaged people in my family. It was never transitional. It became the last stop for really talented people that I know, that I love. And those are conversations that we shy away from, but that we need to figure out how to make sure that our children are resourced and that our families are resourced to make sure that they get the help they need, or to prevent them from even starting, which I would prefer prevention, right? And I recognize that that's controversial, and I recognize, but I see that, I mean, I'm from California and I've seen the devastation firsthand.
Yeah. We see a lot in our families, just as you said. Many of our educators in our, and again, in our network, so many have been affected by these types of social issues, and it's a lot to also carry. As a Latino who succeeded, went to college and got the good paying job and all of that, and to carry the why was it me? I've had to leave people behind. We don't want to leave our families behind. We want to take them with us. So I hear you on some of these issues to kind of really think about, and what might be different for this demographic growth and shift that we're experiencing in this nation. With that, I will show a few slides to some of the key priorities that, by and large, those who we surveyed all had agreement on. I'm going to focus on that. Let me see if I can get this. There we go. So just for the viewers out there, we conducted this survey of voter priorities in education, and we'll be releasing the full report as we speak and after this webinar. But we sent this nationwide to Latino educators, families, education leaders, with the goal of measuring our community's opinion on these policy areas. We have on our policy and advocacy side of our work a Latino action agenda, which covers these key areas in education. Educator diversity is near and dear to us. We really wanted to understand of what importance that had to our prospective voters. Early childhood education, K-12 and higher ed shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But I'm going to go through just a little bit of the data. So again, these were sort of where we had the most consensus across all of our respondents. So 91% of our respondents agree that having ethnic and race matched teachers was important to student success. Of course, we know that as Latinos for Education, we know that it really matters to our students and our families that they have educators that share their backgrounds and experiences, that have the cultural competence, where our families feel comfortable walking into the school building and can find someone they can speak with that will treat them with respect and dignity. These are the kinds of things that make it matter why we have a diverse educator workforce. 95% of our respondents support increased federal spending on PK through 12 education. That shouldn't be a surprise. I think we all know that so many of our states and communities are under-resourced as it relates to spending and the supports that are needed. Of course, we saw the increase during the pandemic, the ESSER dollars that came into our schools, but we're heading into that cliff now in 24 of where that funding is ending. And so we need to, our community wants to make sure, though, that we don't keep going through those peaks and valleys of funding, that we see consistent funding for our schools. 93% of our network supports access to bilingual dual language immersion programs. Again, actually, this one rising to the top doesn't surprise me in the sense that our community would support it. I think that makes a lot of sense, but that it rose so high was of interest to me. Again, I think we see variability in our states, right, in supporting bilingual education, supporting multilingual learners. We need to see that type of support consistent for all of our language learners. And then, dual language immersion. You have a whole contingent of white folks who want their kids in bilingual schools. That's not who we're talking about.
Yes.
We're talking about making sure that our Latino students see their language as the tech secretary says is their superpower.
Yep.
And being bilingual actually builds a lot of competence and brain development that normally wouldn't be had. 94% of our respondents support opportunities for schools to earn college credit, which again, financial barriers are big. As we know, the number one issue in accessing higher education for Latino community. So being able to get college credit in high school, as we've seen with the early college pathways that exist around the country, is game-changing for our students to earn a lot of credits while in high school to improve or decrease the burden actually of the financial barrier. Higher ed, 92% of our respondents are concerned about college affordability, and 90% of our network concerned about the impact of student debt. So again, it goes hand in hand with the other slide on programs like early college pathways and those that remove debt. You're seeing now the cancellation of the student debt, and also free community college is happening. So those kinds of things are what our community wants to see. Lastly, on the question of dreamers, I will keep my opinion to myself because this one's been going around and around way too long.
Yep.
Right? And yet, we still have our Latino community saying we've got to get this done. 91% of respondents support federal financial aid for dreamers and support of a pathway for citizenship for dreamers. So that's a little bit of the data. We need to get into audience participation here with some questions, but do you have any reactions to any of that data and what rose to the top?
So one of the things that watching that people really believed in bilingual education, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he promptly reminded me that outside of the indigenous languages that were here before the colonizers, Spanish is America's first language. I was like, and so I think not only should we be embracing that and reminding people of that to be true, but also showing to our children that their opportunity to be bilingual is a superpower that allows them to navigate not just to spaces here in the US, but internationally. And so I thought that was really beautiful. And also, there's so many studies that have been able to demonstrate that by knowing two languages, you become far more analytical. It actually allows you to be not just more analytical, but it gives you also the efficacy of learning not only other language, but math and science and instrument by being bilingual. And so I think reminding people that sometimes our children, it takes them, and this would happen in our household, it takes them a minute to have more of the verbal they have verbal delays, but it's because their brain is mapping their bilingualism. And then, my daughter now, I can't stop her talking, but it was like, but it's real. And it's all based in science, right? It's all based on research. And so when someone comes in and says, we don't want to do that, well, then you're actually hindering my child from being excellent and being the best version of themselves, because all our brains are actually wired to be multilingual.
Thank you for that. I think we're ready to open it up for just a few questions in the last 10 minutes of the webinar. Elvis, are you coming back on? There you are.
I am here. I am here. First of all, thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Maria Teresa, for sharing your invaluable insights and experiences. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Latina leadership to the critical stakes of the upcoming election and the evolving role of Latino voters. Now, I do want to shine a light on what we're hearing from our audience. We saw people who resonated with your personal leadership journeys. We saw multiple people call them courageous. We saw Ryan Martin Valenzuela on LinkedIn share that he's considering running for office in California. We hope you do. We hope that a lot of you watching are considering running for office and actually taking that leap, because we need more Latino leadership across the spectrum of elected office. On the youth vote, AD Baena said that our children are clearly more conscious and active with deliberate engagement. I love this generation. They will change the world. So yes, let's
right
hear
there.
Similarly, on the youth vote, Matt Munoz said the youth are getting involved, and it's a beautiful thing. No time to be afraid or shy. Keep encouraging our young people. So thank you all for such a spirited discussion on in the comment section. Now, I do want to turn it over to share a couple of questions from our audience, and this will go to both you, Maria Teresa and Amanda. It is from Ray in Arkansas. He says, DEI is under attack in public education. What are we to do? And Amanda, I'll start with you.
So DEIB is under attack in our schools right now. We know what's happened in the last couple of years with the affirmative action coming down, with book bans. These are all issues that will affect our Latino community, as we know. And it's a very personal thing for us at Latinos for Education, because we're called Latinos for Education. And so we have to even be thinking about what will happen in a scenario where organizations like ours, by the very nature of having the name Latinos in our name, might have to operate in different ways to still do our work. So look, I will say we got to get our folks out to vote, right? As Maria Teresa, I'm sure, would say. And that's going to be super important in our families, to demand in our schools what their children need, such as the diversity of their educators, such as the types of books that are culturally affirming, etc. It's going to be our families, that I would say that if we can get them with their voices to be heard at school committee meetings and school board meetings. We've seen that with our own familias, through our Familias Latinas por la Educación. They're making demands of, this is what we want and need for our children. So let's get our parents, in the same way we're getting our youth educated about voting, let's educate our familias about our school systems, about what's important to them, and about how to successfully make their case to get things done in their schools.
Maria Teresa, do you have any thoughts on the question?
So I mean, there's a reason why DEI is under attack, and it is because my daughter is a brand new 7th grader as of yesterday. So she represents the alpha generation, the beginning of the alpha generation, the majority minority country. This largest demographic of children in American schools are biracial. The second largest are Latino. And if we are to take a step back of why DEI is under attack, it's because of the generation that is born today. That if we do not figure out how to make different sectors of our government, of our institutions, of our learning learning arenas, from media, from Silicon Valley on forth, to demand that it reflects our country, we're going to look more like a South African apartheid system than we are a multicultural democracy. And so, to what Amanda was saying, it is incumbent of us, as the ancestors of our children living in their classrooms right now, to take exception with the fact that they're trying to dismantle a pipeline of diversity and inclusion. Because if we don't have that diversity and inclusion, if our children are not trained on how to be leaders in these different spaces, we are not going to have reflective institutions of leadership that reflect the values of the country. And that is, it's being done by intention, by people who are afraid of the demographic shifts. But I hate to tell them, the demographic shift have happened. And our job now as leaders in different spaces is to make sure that we're going every single day to work to provide counsel and direction so that our children, when they are our age in those spaces, can compete fairly based on their abilities and not because they've been placed in siloed areas of where they should be competing, if that makes sense.
That's very well said, Maria Teresa. Thank you so much. I wish we could continue this conversation. Unfortunately, we are coming up against time. I encourage everyone to check out the comments on our various platforms, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and YouTube. Maria Teresa, I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights. Your contributions have been incredibly valuable in deepening our understanding of the critical issues facing the Latino community this election cycle. But now, as we approach the end of our program, I'd like to hand it back to Amanda for some final thoughts and to close out today's discussion. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Wow. Thank you, Elvis. It was such a delightful conversation. Gracias, Maria Teresa. Really appreciate you and the insights you brought to this conversation. I think you've inspired us all to make sure that we are supporting our young people to vote, to getting our families out to vote if they haven't before. So all of that, all of what you said is an inspiration for all of us to get involved, to get excited about what change we want to see and to make sure that our vote and our voice is heard. So thank you for that. And then let me just say that we will be sending out, and you'll see it on our social media platforms, just the information you need to help support Get Out the Vote, the registration links, etc. Spread the word. Our educators, please do that. Make your voice count. Register to vote. You see the link here, and we'll be spreading that across social media platforms. And then you'll also see our report that I was mentioning during our webinar today. You can scan now to listen to Voces Latinas report, our survey on voter priorities in education. Thank you so much to all of you for taking your time today to spend it with us. And we look forward to the next LatinoED talks in the coming months. And once again, gracias a ti, Maria Teresa Kumar. We look forward to seeing and hearing from you a lot on our public stage in the coming months. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.